everyone is talking these days about blood moons. Why? We know from Joel that before the awesome, great day of the Lord, the day of judgment, there's going to be a moon that will be all blood. But what most people don't know is that every time, historically, when there is what is known as a tetrad is 4 blood moons in a row. Every time there has been a tetrad on biblical feasts, not on the feast that most Christians celebrate, but I mean on the biblical feast, something significant has happened to change the whole world. We have this tetrad, the 4 blood moons, and the last one, which will happen next year, will be the most unusual that ever has occurred in history. In fact, we don't even have any more of these tetrads scheduled that occur on feast days for over 400 years after that. Why is it so unusual, Mark?
Well, have you ever heard of a super moon?
I actually heard of it because I interviewed you on radio. Before that, I didn't know diddly.
Well, here's what a super moon is. Here's the Earth, and here's the moon. And the moon's orbit around the Earth is elliptical. It's far away, and it gets close, and it's far away. Every month, it does a complete orbit. Mm-hmm. When the moon is at its closest point to Earth, it's called its perigee, all right? Well, if the moon is a new moon at perigee, at its closest point, you don't even see it. But if the moon is a full moon at its closest point to Earth, according to NASA, it looks 14% larger. It's this big super moon because it's so close. Well, guess what? Next year, on September 28th, we not only have a full moon, we have a super moon that is at its closest point to Earth, not just for the month, but for the entire year. And it's a super blood moon that is going to be seen in Jerusalem on the Feast of Tabernacles and in a Shmita year.
No, what's a Shmita year?
Now, the Shmita year is every 7th year.
Jubilee.
Every 7th year, the land had to rest and it couldn't be tilled. But the amazing thing is this. Every man, see, God commanded all the men to be in Jerusalem 3 times a year.
Right.
He didn't command the women because the men have to be told what to do. The women don't, okay? But every 3 times a year, all the men had to be in Jerusalem. But in the Shmita year, in the 7th year, specifically on the Feast of Tabernacles, it says in Deuteronomy, every man, woman, child, and even the stranger has to be there to hear the King of Israel read from the Scriptures.
Okay, now this begs the question, why is God giving us so many sign after sign after sign for next year? Use your sanctified intellect, having studied astronomy, having studied the Bible, having studied the biblical feast. You're an expert in these 3 arenas. What is going to happen?
Well, here's one thing that I think. In the book of Joel you mentioned, where it talks about the sun turning to sackcloth and the moon to blood, it's in the same context that God says He's going to judge all the nations who are trying to divide the land of Israel. And that's what's going on right now. And America is leading the push to divide the land of Israel. And I think these are the heavenly billboard warning signs by God to Israel not to divide their land. It's also that America should not partake. But here's the other thing. We see a war in 1948, a biblically prophetic war. We see a biblically prophetic war in 67. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think there's a good chance we could see a biblically prophetic war in Israel because there are several that haven't taken place yet. But guess what else? That 7th year is an economic reset year. That is when all the debts were to be forgiven and the people released. But in Nebuchadnezzar's day, they had set the people free, and then they changed their mind and put them all back into bondage. And God said, because of that, this 7th year is going to be a year of judgment. And the 7th year has been a year of judgment. And do you know in 1994, do you remember the Shoemaker-Levy comet when it got pummeled 21 times? Okay, that was a Shmita year. And guess what weekend it happened on? The 9th of Av. which is the time when the temple was destroyed twice. And so I thought back in 1994 that meant with 21 fragments that the 7 times 3 is 21. The next 3 Shmita years are going to be times of judgment. And 2001 was a Shmita year, or the 7th year. And that's when the Dow fell its biggest drop ever to that time. And it fell on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the 7th month. It fell 7%.
Tell me the next drop.
The next one is 2008 when the big stock market crash happened. Guess what? That was the Shmita year. It happened on the first day of the 7th month. The Dow fell 777 points. It was
no, you're making that up.
No.
It did. I saw it. It really did.
Yeah.
Now listen, how many more signs do you need?
Millions of readers worldwide were spellbound by Jonathan Cahn's blockbuster book, The Harbinger. Now he has a new book that he says holds the key to the rise and fall of nations, economic recession, financial collapse, and your future. It is called The Mystery of the Shmita, and Jonathan joins us now with more on that. First off, welcome. And what is the Shmita?
The Shmita is a mystery that goes back 3,000 years from Moses, literally, that God gave to Israel that lies behind the rising and crashing of Wall Street, the rise of America. It begins in the Torah when God gives to Israel a pattern. He says every 7th year you will have a Sabbath rest. No sowing, no reaping, just total rest. The Shmita year, it's called the Shmita, builds up to its conclusion at the end near the autumn. It's called Elul 29, the final day. On that day, Elul 29, all debt is wiped out, all credit's wiped out, financial accounts wiped clean. Now, the Shmita was supposed to be a blessing, but when Israel turned away from God, the Shmita becomes a sign of judgment on a nation that has turned away from God, that strikes the financial realm. Now, the amazing thing is this mystery has been behind the collapsing of Wall Street for our entire lifetime. And this mystery, it has pinpointed, literally, the collapse of our economy down to the days, down to the hours, down to the seconds. And it's even, we're coming to one right now.
All right, here comes the breaking news. We've now lost about 40 points of the gains that the markets were able to get for the Dow Jones Industrials in the wake of Fed Chair Janet Yellen's both Q&A comments and the announcement that rates would remain 0 to 0.25%, but that we will see a tightening this year. Is the economy ready for a rate hike, or are we behind on this issue? Fox Business's senior Washington correspondent Peter Barnes also asked about the 2008 bailouts. I kind of got on the edge of my chair because I was interested in hearing what she had to say. Peter, the nugget of that.
Well, yeah, Liz, let's start first off with monetary policy, because she said once again that the Fed's decision on when it's going to start raising interest rates is going to depend on the incoming data. But clearly, the Fed today set the table for a possible rate hike in September by saying that the weakness of the first quarter was in the rearview mirror and that the economy has been expanding moderately recently. Here's what she said.
Will depend on unfolding data in the months ahead, but certainly an increase this year is possible. We could certainly see data that would justify that.
And then I asked her about the AIG bailout and the decision on Monday by that federal court here in Washington, which basically said that what the Fed did when it rescued AIG and took it over was illegal. She said that she disagreed, that the Fed still believes that the takeover of AIG was totally legal. Here's what she said about that.
We believe that the terms of that intervention were tough and appropriately so in order to protect taxpayers from the risks that those rescue loans presented at the time they were made.
And the terms did include taking over the company by taking control of basically 80% of the stock. Liz, back to you.
Stocks took a big step back Friday. Several large U.S. companies reported disappointing earnings, and there are concerns that Greece may default on its debt and that China's stock market is soaring too high. The Dow dropped 279 points. The Nasdaq sank almost 76.
All right, let's get to the gist of what they're talking about here, what the worry is, that rates go up, markets go down. The reality that is sinking into the markets is that later on this year, sometime this year, rates will go up. Not everyone buys that, but former Treasury Undersecretary John Taylor says that, that might not be so favorably received. But furthermore, John is arguing that this is way too late, that we should have been doing this much earlier. So, John, your point is that welcome the rate hike, but it's just too little too late, essentially, right?
Well, I think let's get on with it, is why I put it now. If not now, when? And they're talking about September. That would be fine. I think the thing is, it's going to be a positive. There may be some, sort of shorter run hits here and there, but ultimately this economy could do better with a more normal monetary policy. But ultimately it'll be better for the economy, and I think that's why they're going to move before too long.
All right, we'll watch very closely. Secretary, thank you very, very much. Again, for those of you who just tuned in, the betting is that we are going to see a rate hike by the end of the year, and that was sealed by that better than expected employment report on Friday. The only question is when exactly later in the year we see it, despite protests from the likes of the IMF to hold on that. Now again, that is just sort of getting bogged down in a lot of gobbledygook, but the fear is that once the Fed starts this process of raising rates, investors are going to get out of town.
There is the corona, the sun's faint, thin atmosphere that you can never see usually. You can only see because the moon has now completely eclipsed the sun. There is one tiny thing on, one tiny feature at about 11 o'clock that looks like a prominence potentially. It could be part of the chromosphere, the inner atmosphere of the sun. This is extraordinary.
China, the world's tallest peak, Mount Everest, moved 3 centimeters, 1.2 inches, to the southwest because of the Nepal earthquake that devastated the country in April, Chinese state media reported on Tuesday. The 7.8 magnitude quake reversed the gradual northeasterly course of the mountain, according to a report in the state-run China Daily, citing the National Administration of Surveying, Mapping and Geoinformation. Before the quake, Everest had moved 40 centimeters to the northeast over the past decade at a speed of 4 centimeters a year, the report said. The mountain also rose 3 centimeters over the same time period. The earthquake caused an avalanche on Everest, killing 18 people and leaving its climbing base camp in ruins. It prompted authorities in both China and Nepal to cancel all climbs for this year. The mountain straddles the border between the two countries. 2 earthquakes, on April 25 and May 12, killed more than 8,700 people in Nepal, triggered landslides and destroyed 500,000 homes, leaving thousands without shelter just weeks ahead of monsoon rains.